This episode of The Charity Show is brought to you by The Good Studio, creating great content for good causes. Hello and welcome to The Charity Show, the podcast made by charity people for charity people. Every episode we sit down with someone doing something brilliant in the sector and have a proper, honest conversation about the job, the challenges, the wins and everything in between. Whether you're a CEO, a fundraiser, a comms professional, a trustee, or someone giving a few hours a week to a cause you care about, you're in the right place. If you're new here, hit follow wherever you get your podcasts. You won't want to miss what's coming up this week as we take a look at a charity capturing the memories of veterans across the UK. Now, if you've been with us for a while, a 5-star rating takes about 5 seconds and makes a genuine difference to how many people find the show. Right then, here's what's in store for episode 45. I wanted to talk to you about the Manosphere with Louis Theroux, Inside the Manosphere. Have you seen it?
We have. I didn't hear anything about it until Jake, my eldest, said, look, we have to watch this.
Off the back of this, I think it's actually a good thing that charities are stepping up and highlighting some of these issues and some of the ways that they can actually counter it and help young men to kind of see the light and not be drawn into this dangerous world.
I've done a couple of history programmes, met a few veterans, then became quite conscious of the fact that Harry Patch, who was the last surviving First World War veteran, passed away. And I remember thinking at the time, gosh, it's not going to be long before the Second World War veterans have passed away. And I had the skill set to think, well, I could do something about this.
Welcome back to The Charity Show. I'm Piers Townley.
And I'm Tim Bainan. Great to be back, Piers. The sun's shining. And as we chat, you're prepping for your big twilight walk this weekend. I know it's a busy one and you're not feeling 100%, but have you got your fancy dress ready?
Yeah, I've got all the branded charity T-shirts and I'm busy checking, as all the team are, checking the weather forecast. So yeah, bright sunny day planned for Saturday. And obviously as this episode goes out, it will have been hopefully a grand success. Over 1,300 walkers. It's our hero campaign. It brings people from all over the country walking with their families through the parks of central London. A huge undertaking, a huge logistical kind of nightmare for our events team, and I'm just in awe of the way they get it all sorted out. But yeah, really, really looking forward to it. There's going to be a mixture of trustees, some of our high-profile supporters, loads and loads of families, and it is just a wonderful, emotional, but really celebratory and supportive events. Yeah, so we're really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. I think you should take a microphone with you, Piers. Take a microphone, record a little bit of out and about on the walk, and capture a few vox pops, chat to some people.
Great idea. Yeah, great idea. Get a little bit of on the scene for the show. Fantastic. I'm just really looking forward to it. It's been a real good week.
Excellent. Let's do that for the next episode. Well, not quite as exciting a week for me. Lots of sort of work, admin stuff to do and sorted out. This week seems to have been an admin week in our house. Lots of things to sort out on the admin front. But did manage to squeeze in a bit of TV watching. Wanted to talk to you about the Manosphere with Louis Theroux, Inside the Manosphere. Have you seen it on Netflix?
We have. I didn't hear anything about it until Jake, my eldest, said, look, we have to watch this. It's, all his mates were talking about it. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. And then he said, oh, it's Louis Theroux. And I was like, of course, huge Louis Theroux fan. So, yeah, so sat down and watched it and just got more and more angry and perplexed and confused and just, oh, my God, what is going on? But it was really, really good to watch it. I watched it with both my two teens. They were filling in all the blanks when I was asking who's that and who's this. So yeah, you've come away feeling, oh, there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it? I think I watched it. I love Louis Theroux like you, and he's very good at getting the best and the worst out of people in terms of letting them talk, letting them dig their own holes. And we really saw that, I think, because they just came across as just unbelievable that men can think in that way and act in that way and have those opinions in this modern world.
Yeah, and the followers that these guys have, or the followers that some of these influencers have. But you're right, Louis' style is just incredible, isn't it? By saying nothing, he gets everything said, in response.
Yeah, really, it is. He is very good, and it did shock me, and it was quite, shocking to my, 14-year-old son, 15-year-old son. How old is he? Oh, I can't remember. 15. He's 15. As with you, filling in the blanks, saying, "Oh, I've seen this guy on TikTok. I know who he is, and that kind of stuff." And the really scary thing is, William told me that basically he doesn't search for this stuff. It just gets delivered to him on a plate on his TikTok. The algorithms just push it at young men, children.
Yeah, it's the old bait and switch, isn't it? They often hook you in. I mean, it's an ages-old kind of way of getting people hooked in on any kind of selling or pyramid scheme or kind of drawing people into a way of thinking. They advertise or they talk about or they feature one thing and then it switches to another thing. And you can see why it's appealing to the younger teens out there and see why they've got these huge followers. But ultimately it came across as most of it was just hollow and predatory in terms of just money. And
that's it. They're just, all they're after is views and clicks and likes and money. And all they're doing is selling products and just, doing more and more extreme stuff.
Age-old grifters, age-old con men. It's just been exploded and supercharged via the internet, isn't it? I mean, this was, these sort of schemes and this sort of way of doing things was always there, just never so amplified.
No, and never quite so bad in terms of misogyny as it is right now. Really interesting, though. I did have a look at what a number of charities have said in response to this program, and if anyone hasn't seen it, I urge you to go and see it. Check it out on Netflix, just so you can see what they're talking about. But I'll just lift off a few of these charities that have come out and said something in response to it. So Women's Aid, they highlighted that young people who consume manosphere content are 5 times more likely to view physical harm as acceptable if the perpetrator apologizes. That's just ridiculous. Can you imagine that? Absolutely crazy. They argue that while the content is framed as advice, it is rooted in dangerous misogyny, which is absolutely the case. Movember, meanwhile, focused on the mental health toll on men. They noted that while 2/3 of young men engage with this content for guidance, which is in itself terrifying, 2/3 look to these idiots for guidance. That is terrifying. Many report high levels of psychological distress and rigid attitudes towards gender and relationships, and yeah, absolutely shocking. You could see that in the film. Refuge linked the documentary's themes to tech facilitated abuse. They argue that social media algorithms proactively push this content to boys. I've seen it. It's happening to my son. Just gets thrown at him. Normalizing control and punishment of women in relationships, which is unbelievable. And TLC, Talk, Listen, Change, emphasised that the manosphere is a sales funnel that breaks down men's self-esteem to sell them products, noting that the primary motivator for many young men is simply a desire for connection and friendship. So off the back of this, I think it's actually a good thing that charities are stepping up and highlighting some of these issues and some of the ways that they can actually counter it and help young men to kind of see the light and not be drawn into this dangerous world. So yeah, I was shocked by that.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? And it has dominated the news since as well, and will continue to.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, our guest today set up his charity not from a boardroom or a business plan, but from a nagging feeling that something really important was about to be lost forever. Martin Bisiker is the founder of Legasee Educational Trust, which he set up in 2011 after a successful career in TV. He'd spent years making programmes, met a few veterans along the way, and slowly realised that the window for capturing their stories on film was closing fast.
Legasee now holds an archive of over 700 filmed interviews with veterans of conflicts from the Second World War right through to more recent campaigns, all freely available to view on their website. They've branched out into podcasting, into theatre, into schools work, and the whole thing grew out of one man, a camera, and a growing sense of urgency.
We'll be splitting the conversation across 2 parts, as always, with the latest news from the sector stuck in the middle. In part 1, Martin talks about how Legasee started, what drives him, and the extraordinary experiences of sitting across from people who carry decades of untold history. And then after the news, part 2 gets into the archive itself, the podcast series, the new Aid and Emergency project, and how Martin thinks about the legacy of legacy.
Here's part 1.
Martin, welcome to the Charity Show. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us on this sunny afternoon. It's fantastic to see you. Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about Legasee. For those people listening who might not have heard of Legasee before, can you give us a quick overview of yourself and the organisation, what the charity does?
Yeah, so my name is Martin Bisiker. I'm the founder of Legasee Educational Trust. I set it up in 2011, and it sort of came out of the fact that I worked in television, and I always had an interest in the military. All the veterans I meet now say, "Oh, you in the military? You in the military?" But no, it was just an interest in it, partly because of my grandfather, who was a desert rat in the Second World War, and we now realise potentially, had PTSD. It wasn't labelled, we didn't know it at the time, but I used to get sort of little snippets of information from him about his time in the desert more than in Italy. And so, that was a sort of an inherent interest in the military. Where I lived in Bristol, every year there would be an army camp on the village green, and we used to go over and sort of, medal around over there. So I was a boyish boy in that respect, but didn't really think much about it or the military sort of from childhood on, really, until I was working, as I say, I worked in television. I'd done a couple of history programs, met a few veterans, then became quite conscious of the fact that Harry Patch, who was the last surviving First World War veteran, passed away. And I remember thinking at the time, gosh, it's not going to be long before the Second World War veterans have passed away. And I had the skill set to think, well, I could do something about this. It wasn't a burning desire to sort of, go out and create legacy, but it did give me an opportunity to go and actually interview veterans. And I actually met an interesting veteran called Freddie Hunn, who effectively told me my grandfather's story. And I was just, I don't know, that interview, and also one other with a guy called Brian Bird, who was a Second World War Spitfire pilot who'd never told his story. They really made me think, gosh, there's something in this, and particularly having filmed it and thinking, YouTube generation, young people, they need to hear these stories. So essentially it grew out of that. Then there was a bit of a fortuitous chance encounter with a lady called Ellen Clark, who had worked at Age UK and knew a lot about charity organisation. And she was retired from Age UK, but was sort of looking for a swan song job where she could help somebody with some of the skills that she had. She'd actually worked for VW and PR for many years before that. And she said to me, look, what you're doing is wonderful, but you can't keep paying for this. You've got to make yourself an organisation, do it the charity way. And so we set up Legacy. I interviewed quite a few more veterans. By this point, I've probably interviewed 20, 30 veterans maybe. And we did. We then got money from the Heritage Lottery Fund, and that was sort of the first of our big projects. In fact, that was on the Berlin Airlift, bizarrely, because I'd never even heard of the Berlin Airlift, and I was absolutely staggered that just 3 years after the Second World War, having blown the place to Germany to bits, we were going in and helping them, which still strikes me as quite peculiar. But yeah, really, it's sort of been a hamster wheel ever since, with projects that help to grow the archive. And with a growing archive, then there's better opportunity to talk to schools and share the archive with them. And then each of the projects we've done has provided us with the opportunity to do educational or teaching resources. And we've now done multiple projects, and we've got just over 700 interviews, filmed interviews, all available to view on the website, all freely available, which was always a bit of a bugbear because, just going back a fraction, when I wanted to know more about my grandfather in Casino and places like that, those stories weren't really available. And if they were, it was Imperial War Museum, and it might be an MP3 that you could download. You didn't get to see or understand who it was. So my interviews have always been a bit about social history. Who are they? Where are they from? What was life like before they even thought about going into the military? So you get a sense of the person that you're watching. And we're just embarking on a new project about the Aden emergency, which is another one of those which is a sort of forgotten war. But again, all the veterans in that are all late 70s into their 80s. We've already missed a couple. There's a sort of urgency to capture these stories, and it's sort of a never-ending urgency because each decade there's another conflict. So, yeah, that's where we're at now.
Just before we dig a little bit more into that, Martin, could you tell us a little bit more about your grandfather's story, the impact and the starting point of the legacy from his story? What was the situation with him and his backstory?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, the problem with my grandfather being completely candid, my memories of my grandfather, he died when I was young. He was 66 when he passed away, and I think I was 13. But I used to rub his back, and he had terrible back problems. And that would have been as a consequence of being, a driver in the artillery, thundering around over sand dunes with, no back support, no nothing. I mean, just that's the way it was. He also used to get this thing which was quite terrifying for a young person because we didn't understand it, where he'd sort of be sitting in his chair crying, talking about his eyes, he can't see. And he said it was when he, would be out of this stage, he'd sort of talk about it as a sand blindness because they used to get the desert storms out there. And your eyes would be filled with sand. Whether that was, obviously there was no sand in his eyes, so it must have been a sort of psychological reverb from his period. And so he didn't really talk about war in much depth. I just sensed the consequence of the war. I mean, and the other place that he did talk about, but I really heard it more through my father, who he spoke to a little bit about, was this place called Monte Cassino, which is in Italy, which sounded really cool, but yeah, again, no graphic detail about what he experienced. I mean, my grandfather was one of those classic, he didn't talk about the war. I think 20 years beyond that, as I was in my 30s and the veterans were into their 70s, 80s, perhaps they're thinking, well, I need to tell my story now. I've got to. I want to get it off my chest. But there are still plenty of people that I've met whose son or grandson has said, "Oh, you got to come and interview grandfather. You got to come in." I'm always a bit nervous about that because, they want it, but does grandpa want to talk about it? So yeah, that is. I didn't have much information, but I had this sort of resonance of something pretty significant that had obviously happened to my grandfather that maybe subconsciously made me want to know more. Certainly when I found Freddie Hunn, I felt like, gosh, I really got to understand what on earth my grandfather would have experienced. And he talked about, Stuka bombers diving down on them and there's no protection, and using the sun compass to navigate when you're lost in the middle of, the Alamein or somewhere out that way. Do you know what I mean? So it was, I don't think it was therapeutic, but it was certainly interesting.
Fascinating. It must be absolutely fascinating. And it's something that I think everybody listening to this who has grandparents who were involved in the Second World War can relate to this and kind of understand exactly what you're saying, Martin. I know from, my grandfather, I wish I'd spoken to him more about it, but I think he, we never really talked about it. He didn't really want to talk about it. It didn't really sort of just come up. And then time went on, you just didn't talk about it. So when he died, we lost all of that. And I know he had an amazing story because he was in the Navy and he was, did a lot of the stuff in the Atlantic where, he was being
convoys.
Convoys and hunted by submarines and all that kind of stuff. And I know he had a lot of stories. He was quite, he was quite high ranking and it's lost. It's just lost. I wouldn't know where to start in terms of finding out about it. So I wish that he'd shared his story. Do you find now that is that a generational thing where when, my granddad didn't want to talk about it, are there lots of others who don't want to talk about it who you wish would? Or do you find now as people, as you suggested just now, that as people are getting older and getting towards the end of their life, that they want to unburden and that they want to share their stories?
I don't think it's changed. I mean, a good example is what we're doing now with the Aden emergency. The Aden emergency was a brutal conflict. It fought in very, very difficult conditions in now what is Yemen, against a very similar enemy to what what America is now currently fighting against. And there are veterans that I've wanted to talk to because I know that they were doing something interesting here or there or what have you, and they don't want to talk. So no, I mean, I think it's literally down to the individual. Some people, and a lot of, maybe less now, but certainly Second World War, they just didn't think they did anything special. And my point has always been that, an individual story on its own isn't necessarily that exciting. It will be of interest to somebody who really wants to know about that particular narrative, but it's the collective that becomes really valuable. So, I think it's like a jigsaw, and I'm sort of explaining that to the Aden veterans at the moment. We've got this jigsaw. We've got a 35-piece jigsaw that we need to build, and we don't want pieces the same. So, it's about trying to fill a jigsaw with lots of different stories so that individually each of those pieces are quite interesting. But when you put them all together, you get a good picture of the whole thing.
Just as an aside, thinking about that and understanding those stories and the realities of war and the impact it has on people for a lifetime afterwards. Do you think, I read something just the other day, or I saw it on the telly, I can't remember, about the fact that what's currently happening in Iran is almost being seen as almost like it's not real. It's a TikTok war in terms of the fact that people are posting up, the Americans are releasing these black and white images of things being blown up and all that stuff's going over social. Is it even more important to actually record people's first-hand accounts now to reinforce the reality of war for a generation that is seeing it through TikTok?
Well, I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, very interesting point as well. But I think it's sort of almost, it's just coming down to that is the new way of warfare, frankly. Less people getting involved in these conflicts because the technology now is such that you don't need to put people in harm's way, which is, it's a different conversation, but it's fundamentally the dilemma that our Prime Minister has now is, does he want to put people in danger? So, perhaps this becomes a more valuable resource simply because what we are talking about is warfare that really, as of now, is never going to be the same again. This was the warfare, and the new warfare is literally, through the viewfinder, watching a drone target in, a bit like we've seen in Ukraine, on a building and blowing it up, or a ship and blowing it up, less about the people. I'm sure the Iranians or would see it a different way because they're the people that are on the receiving end of it. But I think it's, I think there's probably an extra reason to capture these stories now.
But you touched on it as well, Martin, a bit earlier. There's an urgency to capture these stories, obviously, because of the age of a lot of these veterans. How do you balance that desire to capture all their stories with the reality that some of them aren't going to be here for very much longer?
Well, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I literally was chatting to someone the other day about Aden, and he said, "Oh, it's a shame he didn't get to speak to so-and-so. He just passed away 3 months ago." All that does is reinforce to me that, there's no time like the present, frankly. And the Aden emergency, I keep referring to that just simply because that is the live project. But, again, the last big project we did was all about the Women's Royal Army Corps. It disbanded in 2000. Well, I've got to get my dates right. But, again, plenty of the people that had the really varied, interesting job within the women's branch of the Royal of the Army, we didn't get to them because they'd already passed away. So, I don't think I worry about the ones that I haven't got. It kind of goes back to television, when you're doing an edit, you're always thinking, oh, why didn't I get this interview? Or why didn't, and the sage people, the good executive producers say, don't worry about what you don't have, focus on what you do have. Same thing with these interviews, There will be amazing interviews out there that I won't get, but I will know that I've tried my best to get some really good ones, and I'll still have a very good picture of Aden or the WRAC or the convoys, etc., etc. So,
just wanted to touch on TV. It's fascinating you come from a TV background, and just thinking back to some of the things that I've enjoyed in the past. Like I remember watching the Band of Brothers series, Saving Private Ryan, the Spielberg's all the stuff that he did. All those programs were preceded, weren't they, by the real interviews with real people who are played by the actors in the TV programs, and that's so powerful to see that. And it really sort of reinforces the impact of what you're about to watch. But having spent years in TV yourself, that's quite a leap to suddenly leave that career behind and to set up a charity. Was that a leap of faith or what?
Yeah, I suppose any time you change career, it's a leap of faith. But fundamentally, I felt like I'd reached the end of my run in television. I mean, a quick aside, very non-charity showing off. I ended up working on a program called Rough Guide Ultimate Escapes. And I was literally going around the world filming ultimate escapes with a lady called Julia Bradbury, who people might know, and the guy called Toby Amies. I filmed Julia Bradbury from a microlight to her microlight, flying along the Zambezi and up and over the Vic Falls.
Wow.
You know,
it's a tough job.
Yeah,
exactly. Do you know what I mean? I genuinely thought at the time it's never going to get any better than this. So, you know, I don't know if that was a catalyst for change, but also then, you know, I had family things going on, and television is not conducive to a good family life, especially when your partner works full time. So, you know, there was a lot of things that made that shift happen. It wasn't simply that, I wanted to go and set up Legasee. I'd moved into corporate. I'd created a small corporate film company. So, you know, I had that to go, and that's really why I was doing that. So.
Time for a bit of charity news, and my story this week is a proper good news story, Piers. And I think anyone who's been following Sir Chris Hoy's story over the last couple of years will find this one genuinely uplifting. The Tour de Four is back for 2026, taking place in Glasgow on Sunday the 6th of September. And this year it's bigger, it's more ambitious, and it involves 5 major UK cancer charities. For anyone who doesn't know the story, Sir Chris Hoy, 6-time Olympic cycling champion, was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer in 2023. He was told a year later that it was terminal. And rather than stepping back from public life, he channeled everything into creating the Tour de Four, a mass participation cycling event designed to shine a light on stage 4 cancer and raise money for research. Last year's event raised more than £3 million from a cycling event in Glasgow. That's £3 million. What a huge sum. This year, fundraising will support 5 charities: Breast Cancer Now, Cure Leukemia, Macmillan Cancer Support, Maggie's, and Prostate Cancer UK, with general donations split equally between all 5 of those charities. There are routes for everyone, from a 56-mile cycle to a 1K family ride to a static challenge, so there's generally no excuse not to get involved. And the supporter list from last year included Sir Andy Murray, Sir Ben Ainsley, Rebecca Adlington, Duncan Scott, and Sir Steve Redgrave. So the company is pretty good. You're going to meet some good people on this trip. Registration is open now at tourdefour.com. And I think what's worth sitting with here, beyond the fundraising numbers, is what Sir Chris himself has said about this. He knows there isn't a cure for him, which is just so tragic, of course. But he hopes that what the event raises will protect the next generation. That's a remarkable thing, and a remarkable legacy thing for him to do with the time that he has left. And Piers, you know all about remarkable events. You've got the big walk coming up this weekend. How important do you think it is that these big participation events happen, not just to raise money, but to bring people together?
Yeah, I think they're the bread and butter, aren't they? Sometimes you can see for example, the London Marathon and the absolutely huge opportunity is for so many charities to raise not just, cash, also just raise their profiles, raise awareness of their brands, awareness of their cause, and that feeds through to multimedia, to TV, to socials. They are just what the sector thrives on, really.
Absolutely, definitely. Apart from the fact the news that you've got a shocking cold this week, Piers, what else have you caught up with in the news this week?
Breathing through Lemsip, my story, the one that I've seen this week, is one that I think deserves more attention than it's getting, because it's a really significant national moment that the charity sector is right at the heart of. This year, 2026, it's been designated the National Year of Reading, led by the National Literacy Trust in partnership with the Department for Education. And the reason it exists is pretty stark. Research published in late 2024 found that children's reading for enjoyment is at its lowest level in 20 years. I think this is really shocking. And it also found that only 1 in 3 children enjoy reading in their free time, and only 1 in 5 read daily for fun. The campaign's brand identity is called Go All In, and the ambition is to make reading a shared national mission, reaching boys aged between 10 to 16, parents in disadvantaged communities, and children in their early years. The Julia Bradbury Trust has already committed £3 million, the single biggest donation to the campaign so far, to support the National Literacy Trust's delivery. That's alongside £1.5 million to the Reading Agency's Summer Reading Challenge and £500,000, £500,000 to the Shannon Trust, which works on literacy in prisons. And the Queen has already been involved. She opened the first primary school library as part of the campaign's Libraries for Primaries strand back in February. That's also a lovely corporate partnership angle. Twinkle, the educational resources company, is donating 1 million books in physical and digital formats to schools, libraries and families as part of the National Year of Reading, with a deliberately phygital, phygital approach to reach children however they engage with reading. It's a campaign that recognises something Martin has been doing with Legasee for years, that stories matter, that storytelling is key, that the way we tell them matters, and that getting young people to engage with them is one of the most important things we can do. And it has the funding, the royal backing, and the cross-sector ambition to actually make a dent. I think it's just a fantastic campaign, a fantastic project that's going to do this, hopefully should transform from children's reading and the children's reading lives. My 2 teenagers, mixed bag of trying to get them to read. I took it for granted when I was growing up, Tim. I'm not sure about you. We always read. I was an avid reader, but trying to get the kids off the screens and try and build that in, it must be so hard for teachers and the curriculums and the schools to sort of build this habit. And as parents, you do worry that they're not reading, they're not enjoying it as much as they should do. How about you?
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a fair bit on the show before, Piers. It is a struggle, and screen addiction is a real thing. Getting them off the screens and putting their head in the book, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult, and so it's hard for parents. So any support I think that projects like this can give to parents and to the children themselves and to schools to help them try and encourage kids to turn the screens off, turn their phones off and sit down with a book, I think is a really good thing. So yeah, all for that. Great story. Okay, we've been talking to Martin Bisiker, founder of Legasee Educational Trust, and back in part 1, just a few minutes ago, we heard how the charity came about, what drives Martin to keep going, and some of the extraordinary human moments that happen when a veteran finally tells their story on camera.
In this second half, we get into the work itself in more detail, the archive, now over 700 interviews, and why Martin has always insisted it's freely accessible to anyone. The podcast series, including the D-Day series and the Berlin Airlift. The new Aden Emergency Project, which just secured National Lottery Heritage Fund backing, including a fascinating collaboration with a drama college to bring veteran testimony to the stage. And the Local Heroes programme, Martin's plan to teach young people to build their own archives.
There's also a really lovely moment at the end where we ask Martin what he thinks his grandfather would make of all of this. Let's go straight back to the conversation.
Undoubtedly, Martin, your TV background and all that has shaped how Legasee has developed. Yeah. How you approach each interview with each veteran. I appreciate that each one will be different, but there'll be a kind of formula to the way you approach them and you deal with their stories.
Yeah. I mean, research, key. You need to have some understanding of, both them as an individual. So there's a process, there's a pre-interview call where you try and get a little bit of sense of who this person is. Then there's a structure. So, and then there's an understanding of what they did and what makes their story interesting. So you do research. I mean, today I've been doing lots of research on the guys that I'm meeting tomorrow in Hampshire. So you need to, then you have a big list of questions, but it's, Legasee's oral history is the art of the open question. So it's asking questions that make people talk. A bad interview for me is one where I'm having to speak every 20, 30 seconds to prompt. A good interview is where somebody is, being fed a question and they run with it, they tell you stuff and then you prompt. And sometimes the interviews go off. But essentially, they're chronological records of service. So, where are you from? Why did you get into the military? What was your training like? What did you do? What was it like leaving? How did you find going back into society, which is always interesting, that bit, because, going back to our questions around Second World War veterans, and those that talk or didn't, do you think what some of these people might have endured over 4 or 5 years of combat, almost never ending, in a world war where the whole world was at war, and they come back and they don't give it much thought afterwards. They just get on and get on with their jobs. Whereas, the amount, a lot of people younger are doing less hardship potentially, coming back and finding it much more difficult. I think that's an interesting transition question. So that's the structure, really. Yeah. And they are filmed interviews. I try and do them as best as I can. High, broadcast quality microphones, camera, HD, now 4K, lighting if I've got it. I'm always up against the balance between, making it look beautiful and not making it look like a TV set. So they're like, lights, it's like just a chat with me, that's how I tell them. So there's a balance, but equally, I don't want to be in a room, get quite frustrated when they say, "Oh, we're going to interview in the conservatory." Oh my God, yeah. You've got bird noise going on. You've got it's a sunny, cloudy day. The clouds in and out. The light's changing madly, and I'm just trying to focus on the interview. But yeah, so as a perfectionist, you have to be. Yeah, you have to let that go a bit.
It must be quite wonderful, Martin, as well, with some of these interviews when you start. It's always a classic. It's always like, I haven't got much to say. I haven't really got a story. And then all of a sudden, 2 hours later, someone has unburdened their soul, and it's almost been a cathartic telling of something that they know, is really powerful things.
Following on directly from that, Piers, for you as an interviewer, how do you make sure that happens though? Because it's very different to having a cup of tea with someone when you've got a camera and lights and mics and you've got all the setup there. How do you do that? So as Piers says, you can let them tell their full story.
Well, it's literally, ultimately it is just me and them chatting. There's a when I'm setting up, I'll have a chat with them. I try not to chat about what we're going to talk about, because then they'll go, they say, "Oh, I told you earlier. Like, no, nobody knows we spoke. But yeah, the best interviews are the ones where they go, "Oh, I haven't thought of that for such a long time," or "That was great," and you see people talking and they're like this, and then I saw this guy and he was running towards it, and you can see them seeing it, and that's good. But really, I just think maybe I just have a way of just getting people to chat. I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to speak to the veterans, but I do get some nice feedback, and I get especially nice feedback from the families when their their grandfather's parents have passed away. And that's really good when you get that stuff. So,
do you find that the family say, he'd never told us that. I never knew that.
Yeah, lots of times. Yeah, and people are. Literally in the last month, I probably had one or two where they go, "I've just found my grandfather's interview. He never told me he did it. How did you do this? When did he do this?"
Amazing.
So, that's good.
Is there a moment, Martin? So, you've obviously done so many interviews, and the people you speak to have done some amazing things. I suppose there's probably lots of answers to this. Is there one moment or a couple of moments that have really stuck with you, of people retelling their stories? You must hear the horrible bits, but also the beautiful bits and the friendship and everything. Is there one or two interviews that have really stuck with you over time?
There's definitely, there's quite a few, to be honest. Yeah, no, there's. I could single out some.
Is it a type of experience that sticks with you, or is it just individual stories? Do you know what I mean? Collectively, is it a sense of the horror or the friendship?
No, sometimes I'm in hysterics when somebody tells me a really funny story, and you're in it with them, and you have a good laugh. And then there's obviously the moments where when somebody suddenly starts crying or bursts into tears about something that you didn't see coming. Obviously, they stick with you, and you have to be like, invariably I'll say, "Oh, do you want me to stop?" And say, "No, it needs to be said," sort of thing. Harold Addy did that. He was on D-Day. That was a brutal interview. But it's funny. I always say to people, I can, if I see the image of the person on my archive, I can remember the interview. It's quite weird. I can remember the room. It is bizarre. It's like it is a bit of a, I don't know if that says that I've got something wrong with my brain, but that's how I sort of remember stuff. So I can almost look at every interview and kind of remember a moment in that interview. I think that was the moment for me that, stood out. Some of them are disappointing. Not everyone is brilliant, but more than not, because of the fact that I've up until recently, I spoke to them beforehand. So I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. So you knew that you have a kind of an understanding with them. As I say, the ones that are difficult are when somebody said, "Oh yeah, you can't talk to Grandad because he's got bad hearing, but if you just come along," and you sort of think, "Well, I'll do it," and then you realise that Grandad can hear perfectly well, but he don't want to talk. Yeah, and that's expensive. These interviews, because there's a time to get there. It's time out of your schedule, blah blah blah. But no.
But when it works, it must be a hell of a sense of privilege, a hell of a sense of, I don't know, something quite deeply personal about them all.
Yeah, I mean, there is been some absolute crackers. I've been very, very lucky with that respect.
And the archive as a whole, Martin, is free to access, if I'm right in thinking.
Yeah.
Why was that important to you, and how do you want it to be used? How do you want the legacy of Legasee to be used? How do you want that archive, people to access that archive and make the most of it?
Well, I mean, what I did touch on it is because actually I found that actually finding stuff for me, not as a researcher or an academic. If you're a researcher or academic, you get access to lots of archives and research tools and stuff. But if you're Joe Blogs, you don't necessarily. So I just always felt that, it's YouTube, but I didn't want it to be on YouTube. So it's free to view. And the resources that we've created, the teaching resources that we've created, and I don't mind admitting they're great resources, but they're not the easiest to access and work with. And it is definitely something that we are trying to get some funding to improve. And I'll potentially come on to how we might do that in a bit. But fundamentally, it's for researchers, students, young people. They find the teaching resources, teachers doing something on the convoys or the Second World War or on Cold War and finds Korea. And then they access the teaching resources, and then from the teaching resources, they click through to some of the interviews, and then maybe the students can then find out more. So that's the sort of the route in, if you like, I suppose. It's trying to just, and we do some social media, and we just try and access people that way.
Can I just take you back, Martin, to the ongoing project, and you mentioned it in the podcast previously, about the Aden emergency back in the 60s. A lot of our listeners possibly a bit hazy on Aden. Can you just give us an overview about it, what it is and what the current project is?
Yeah, I mean, the Aden emergency 1963 to 67 was essentially the end of the sort of post-colonial period of British history. And it was at a time when the Aden locals, for want of a better expression, wanted to have their land back and wanted the Brits out. And we were hanging in there. But between 63 and 67, it got very spicy. And that was the period that we focused on. It became known as the Aden emergency. Up until that point, it had been fairly calm. Interestingly, Aden was the second busiest port in the world. Not many people know that. It was a very, very important staging post initially for coal. Well, initially for the East Indias. So it was a sort of halfway point. So we were sailing back and forth to East Asia. Then it became important because we took over sail with coal, and there was a coal victualling point. So there's a lot of connections to Liverpool and some of the big Welsh towns where we were, getting coal out. So a lot of Aden communities actually came back to the UK and were working in these big cities. And then it became obviously known for oil. So it's always been it's been a focal point for, a lot of trade. And that's why the Brits held it. Anyway, when they moved out, in June 67 particularly, that was the sort of catalyst for the final withdrawal. There was a big, the Arab communities rebelled basically, and they took out a lot of the Northumberland Fusiliers in a place called Crater, and they also killed a lot of the motor corps. That's not the right word. Armoured motor corps. That's not the right expression. But it was sort of 25 people killed in one day, and it was suddenly realised. And the Labour Party wanted us out, and that was the beginning. That was the very beginning of the end. So it's it is a very topical project because fundamentally, the tribal warfare that we'd kind of policed fairly well. Be careful what I say here, but fairly well for 150 odd years, descended into chaos and civil war, and that's what that is what the Houthis and is going on down there now. So it's just another one of those slightly tragic situations in the Middle East where we did our thing, right or wrong, and then when we withdrew, right or wrong, things went wrong. So, I was nervous when I applied to the National Lottery Heritage Fund about it because I thought, this is actually very topical. This is a very Marmite conflict. And, the National Lottery Heritage Fund have to be mindful of the people who pay for, the lottery tickets and stuff. So I was 50-50, even though I knew it was a strong project because it's based in Blackpool. We had great buy-in. We got great support from, all sorts of partners up there. I just thought even the strongest project in the world could fall over there. So, but we got it, and I'm absolutely thrilled. And it is there one element I would like to talk about in that project is that, we are also using the video and audio testimony to create a theatre piece. So we touched on it earlier about how do we want the legacy to be. It's about engaging young people in different ways with history fundamentally. And I've always wanted to do a sort of verbatim piece, and the Blackpool and the Fylde Creative College, Arts College or Dramatic Arts College want to do something with us, and South Bank University got a wind of it as well, and they want to do something. So there's going to be this co-collaboration, and we're going to use some of the testimony, and these young people are going to kind of perform it and create what I think has the potential to be very interesting sort of theatre piece. We're also engaging young people. We're taking veterans into schools, into the cadet groups and stuff to get them to understand what it is. What is the aid in emergency? Why does it matter?
Fascinating stuff, and really raising the profile of a forgotten conflict to a degree.
Yeah.
How do you, in terms of choosing projects, I think I only saw recently on the news, I think, or on the BBC website or something about a whole list of forgotten conflicts. How do you go about choosing your projects, and what comes next? How do you decide what comes next? Do you look at the age of the veterans? Is that the primary driving factor, or do you what's on your list of priorities?
Do you know what? There isn't. I mean, that sounds really dreadful, doesn't it? It's not very strategically and well planned, but actually the Aid and Emergency project came from the WRAC. I met a lady called Judy Hasnip, who was an Aden veteran herself, but within the Women's Royal Army Corps. And it reminded me of Aden as much as anything. And through her, she put me on to somebody else. And through that person, I had the conversation. I then found out that the Aden Veterans Association are essentially disbanding in 2 years' time. And so that really puts the heritage at risk, which the National Lottery Heritage Fund is a big driver in their sort of decision process. And then you do a bit of research and you think, gosh, yeah, this was, this is a forgotten war. This is forgotten war. So, that's how that came about.
So alongside the video archive, Martin, you moved into podcasting as well, the Berlin Airlift series. Could you talk us through a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, actually, we've done a few now. We did the first one was on the D-Day, 5-part series, and we had a volunteer called Kate Haddock, who is ex-BBC, much more senior than me, I hasten to add, who had been volunteering. I forget what she was doing initially, but we knew that she was a good egg and a good volunteer to have on board. And one of the things we always try and do with our volunteers is, give them the opportunity to do stuff that's going to help them or is of interest, particularly. You don't want to just get them transcribing. So, yeah, anyway, she talked about potentially the possibility of a podcast. And we have an amazing archive of Normandy veterans. And so I said, have a look at the Normandy veterans, have a look at D-Day, see what you can find. And it turns out that her husband, Ian, whose surname I forgot, which is really naughty of me, is an extraordinarily well-respected and accomplished video editor. He actually was the guy that single-handedly essentially put Drive to Survive together, the first series. I didn't know that at the time, but that tells you something of the calibre of the guy. Anyway, with Kate's sort of journalistic narrative expertise and Ian's, magic fingers in the edit or the sound suite, they put together the first series, and that was 5-part series on the D-Day landings. And it was an amazing benchmark, because once you've done something brilliant, you don't want to just suddenly churn out rubbish. So we then got another guy came forward who, Scott MacDonald, who wanted to do something similar. We talked about the Cold War. We knew that Cold War was becoming much bigger in the syllabus, so he took on the Berlin Airlift, and I was really thrilled because that was the first project that we did, as I mentioned, 2013. these veterans, and I never got hold of a single veteran. All of the veterans, all 50 of them, I never spoke to anybody. I couldn't get through to any of them. So, but I do know some of their friends and family. So, they were very thrilled that these stories were coming out again. And he put together a lovely series. And then with the WRC, we're doing some single interview versions. So similar quality, but breaking down an hour interview, 2 hour interview into sort of 20 minutes. So this sort of manageable sound bites. And we will do the same with Aidan. And we may even do a series on Aidan. It's quite a sort of good self-contained narrative. But they're great, and there's a lovely new audience with them. Yeah, I mean, and they're lovely. They are really well. They're nice. They're very well. I mean, we were nominated for Apple Podcast Award of the year. So
yeah, well, I'm going to go and listen for sure. That sounds fascinating. Now, you mentioned volunteering there. Talking of volunteering, if someone's listening to this and wants to help, whether that's as a volunteer, a school, a veteran themselves, perhaps who wants to share their story, or just someone who wants to support Legacy, what's the best way for them to get involved?
Well, just get in touch initially. So we have a sort of a vetting process, depending on whether you want to be interviewed or if you want to volunteer. We're always looking for good volunteers, and there's a lot of interesting stuff coming up through the Aidan projects. But we also have another project which we're sort of rolling out called Local Heroes, which is this sort of youth program which I hope has the potential to provide some unrestricted income into Legacy, which is essentially doing Legacy, but teaching young people how to do Legacy and giving them the resource to build their own archives. And that needs work. We need writers for that. We always need transcribers. We want people to help with the podcasting. Boots on the ground in the Northwest. There's a lot of digitizing for the Aidan project. So yeah, we are the best way to get in touch is to drop us a note at info@legacy.org.uk, and either myself or Lucy or possibly Shelley, who's our new Wonder Woman who's starting in the Northwest as of April, we'll be in touch and we'll talk to them and see what we can do for them.
Brilliant. We'll put all the links in the show notes, Martin, so anyone interested, they can find everything they need in the show notes.
This is a bit of a hypothetical question, this, Martin, but what do you think your grandfather would make of Legacy and what it's become? What would you like him to think of it? Or what do you think he would?
I'd love to think he'd think, great, well done. I mean, I met a guy called John Clark, who was a Northerner. He was my grandfather was a Northerner. He was a Yorkshireman. John Clark was from Lancashire. But he fought a casino with a black watch, and he told it how it was. And I would love to talk to my grandfather and say, I don't think as a 13-year-old I could have, you could have told me this stuff, because he told me exactly how it was. But yeah, it's a lovely question. Never been asked that before. I would love to think that he was thrilled.
I'm absolutely sure he would be. Positively would be. Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure and an absolutely fascinating conversation. So thank you so much. And as I've said, we'll put all the links so everyone can go and check out Legacy in the show notes. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fantastic.
No, thanks for inviting me on. It's been good to talk to you both. Thank you.
Right then, we spend a lot of time on this show, as everyone listening should know by now, talking to people running well-known, well-funded organisations, and that's hugely valuable. There's lots of learning there, of course. But the truth is, the charity sector is held together by thousands of smaller organisations that most people have never come across. Organisations run by tiny teams or entirely by volunteers, operating on shoestring budgets in communities that are often overlooked and quietly, consistently changing lives.
They deserve a platform, so every episode we shine a light on a couple of them. This is the Small Charity Spotlight.
If you work for a small charity or you know one that deserves more recognition, we'd genuinely love to hear from you. Email us at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or use the link in the show notes. Tell us who you are, who you support, and what would make the biggest real-world difference to your organisation right now. We'll do everything we can to get your voices on the show.
So who's first up this week, Tim?
First up this week, we heard from Nikki Truer. She told us about Sheppey Pulse Network charity based on Sheppey. Now, they operate all over Swale and now also out over Medway and Maidstone. And it's a small grassroots charity, Nikki tells us. And she, Nikki Truer, I hope I said your name right, Nikki, is the founder. So thank you so much, Nikki, for getting in touch and telling us about amazing work that you do. Now, Sheppey Pulse Network is a registered charity supporting individuals and families on the Isle of Sheppey, Swale Borough and Kent, who are experiencing hardship, financial pressure, or social isolation. Nikki tells us that we provide practical help such as essential household starter packs, seasonal support for children, and community activities that build connection and well-being. Working with volunteers, local organisations and partners, we focus on inclusive, community-led support that empowers people, reduces isolation and improves quality of life. Amazing work, Nikki. Thank you so much for getting in touch and telling us all about Sheppey Pulse Network Charity. Piers, what about you? Who have you got for us this week?
So this week we've had Marie Connor get in touch with us about HAB, which is Help Against Bullying, which is a UK-based charity dedicated to supporting young people, families and schools affected by bullying. I'll read straight from Marie Connor's note to us that says that HAB, Anti-Bullying and Mental Health, which is the full title of the charity, is a small charity that helps to support anyone going through bullying issues, mental health, disabilities, domestic abuse or bereavement. She says that they raise money to pay for counselling and can get someone in to see one of the counsellors referred to within just a week. The charity also offers support work, assemblies, work and organisation talks, form filling and help with appointments or meetings. And everyone who works for HAB, Anti-Bullying and Mental Health Charity, are volunteers. So thank you so much, Marie, for dropping us a line. A vital support network there, I think.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right there, Piers. 2 more brilliant organisations doing vital work with limited resources and enormous heart, as we always see. And don't forget, if there's a small charity you think we should feature, drop us a line at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com or use the link in the show notes. And that's a wrap for episode 45. A huge thank you to Martin Bisiker for giving us so much of his time and for clearly being such a brilliant storyteller himself. What amazing work Legasee does. Go and check it out.
All the links from today's episode are in the show notes, including everything you need to find Legasee's archive, their podcast series, and how to get involved as a volunteer or supporter. It's well worth a look.
And if today's show has sparked something for you, whether that's thinking about your own organisation's story, your approach to volunteers, or just the question of whose histories we preserve and whose we lose, we'd love to hear from you. Get in touch at thecharityshowpod@gmail.com. And if you'd like to come on the show yourself, do reach out. We're always looking for brilliant people doing brilliant things.
And please, if you've enjoyed the show, leave us a 5-star rating wherever you listen. It takes about 5 seconds, costs nothing, and genuinely helps more people across the third sector find us. More listeners means more stories, more voices, and more the conversations that matter.
We'll be back in a fortnight. Give us a follow so you don't miss it. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Charity Show.